Training programs are now indispensable in Formula One. In the form of financial support, training and time in the simulator, young drivers are being prepared by teams to get into the top class of motorsport. But how exactly does this process go from start to finish? The establishment of a training program for junior drivers, better known as driver academies, started about 20 years ago. Red Bull Racing and Alpine were the pioneers of this, but today almost all Formula One teams have their own young driver program. That makes sense because in the pursuit of success, drivers are the most important piece of the puzzle. Now, Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton, of course, wouldn't be able to break records and become drivers' world champions if they weren't in one of the best cars on the grid. But they're in that car for a reason. They know how to get the most out of it. And in a sport that revolves around hundredths of a second, that can mean the difference between making history and quietly disappearing off the grid again. Risks of the profession. Formula One teams are therefore investing millions to discover the next super talent at a young age, in the form of financial support, sometimes partially covered, sometimes fully covered, professional training, and of course time in the all-important simulator. These drivers are taken by the hand as they battle their way through the different racing classes that are underneath Formula One. Now that all sounds very pleasant, but it's a tough world indeed. Drivers are regularly kicked out of the program without mercy if performances are disappointing. But things sometimes go wrong for the teams too. For example, Alpine recently invested a lot of money in Oscar Piastri, one of the great young talents in the world, in the hope that at some point he would be taking the seat at their racing stable from Fernando Alonso. But after a rather surprising turn of events this summer, Piastri decided to sign a contract with McLaren for 2023. Alpine is even considering closing their junior program as a result of this. The recruitment process. How exactly are these young talents recruited? Well, it usually starts in the higher echelons of the European go-kart classes. These are closely monitored by so-called scouts. The most promising drivers are earmarked and monitored as they make the step into single-seater racing. It's at this point they're normally picked out by one of the teams, but there are always exceptions. For example, Christian Lundgaard was included in the training program by Alpine directly from karting at the age of 15. The Dane drove in Formula 2 in 2020 and 2021, but he has now made the switch to the American NTT IndyCar series. When a junior driver is offered a contract, he is often invited to the Formula One team's factory to sign the papers, writes the F1 website. You can imagine that this is a dream come true for these young drivers. There is the wow effect as well of the team and the building that they signed the deal in, and this is how sentimental value is built up between driver and team immediately. In addition, there are often big names associated with the training program. For example, Helmut Marko is head of training at Red Bull Racing, which once again shows how seriously the F1 teams take their young driver programs. Taking the right path. However, with the signing of the junior contract, a driver is nowhere near there yet. In fact, the real work is just beginning. The next most important step is therefore to choose the right championship. Joining a top team in a top competition at too young an age can put too much pressure on the shoulders of the young driver, but the other way around, in terms of participating in a class that is too easy, also doesn't really get anybody anywhere. The driver and his management always have a say in this choice, but in the end, the team has the final say. Lundgaard explained this to Formula One at the beginning of this year. Drivers are expected to have confidence in their academy's decision. Pressure to perform. In short, drivers are guided through a training program as they look to make their way into Formula One. Now, the costs of participating in these championships are covered sometimes partially, sometimes completely by the teams that they sign with. Experts in this field map out the right route, and the drivers are trained in the factory. In addition, some teams, including Alpine for example, choose to take junior drivers into the garage during race weekends. This allows them to experience up close, for example, the contact between a Formula One driver and his engineer during a race. All this means that the pressure to perform is massive. Every year, a number of promising names disappear from the picture because they fail to meet the lofty expectations. The advantages. Being included in a junior program thus offers several major advantages. For one thing, the driver in the official team clothing is able to walk through the paddock on a race weekend, which gives many people a chance to put a face to the name and generates exposure. In addition, there is the chance to learn from experienced drivers. For example, when Zhou Guanyu was first allowed into the F1 paddock as he made his debut during the first free practice session in Austria in 2021, he was guided by the hand than none other than Fernando Alonso. More important though than all of this is we get back to the major issues. The costs are partially covered for the drivers, and time can be spent at the factory, and a route is mapped out for them by people with the right knowledge to get them into Formula 1. In addition, academy drivers can get acquainted with the media and the entire circus surrounding F1. There is also a chance that they will be deployed during a test day or free practice in order to gain experience in an F1 car. That provides the experience they want and obviously benefits the driver in terms of their performance in Formula 1, but it also adds points to the super license. It therefore has many advantages in all kinds of areas to be part of a driver training program. Success stories. As mentioned briefly already today, almost every single team on the Formula 1 grid has a driver training program. Only Haas are the ones without at the moment. Red Bull Racing and Alpine have the longest history with driver training programs and of course have spawned some big names from them. For example, the likes of Max Verstappen, Pierre Gasly, Danny Ricciardo all have come from Red Bull, but also Lucas Di Grassi, Romain Grosjean and Robert Kubica have come from Alpine. Antoine Herbert, until recently, was one of the bigger talents in Alpine's program, but the Frenchman, of course, tragically died in 2019 after a crash in F2 at Spa-Francorchamps. The Mercedes team has also produced some big names in the sport. For example, you think of George Russell, Esteban Ocon. Charles Leclerc, Sergio Perez and Lance Stroll owe much to Ferrari's training program, while Williams have spawned the likes of David Coulthard, Jenson Button, Nico Rosberg and Valtteri Bottas. However, this was before an official training program was actually established. McLaren, of course, brought through Lewis Hamilton early on in his career, but they've also had the likes of Nick de Vries, who we saw making his F1 debut in Monza this year. Tom Blomqvist is in the academy as well, and there are other notable names either coming through or that have come through for all of these teams. Driver academies work, and being in one is certainly beneficial.